I think we're already live. We already have joining us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everybody here today. My name is Osmara Santana. I'm the Deputy Director at Texas Rising, and we are super excited to have an awesome panel today of wonderful Texas Rising champions that continue to fight for young Texans at the legislature here in Texas. So I'm going to pass it over to Sabrina, who is going to be co-hosting this panel with me today.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be on with, folks that we renown champions of the House right now, people who have continuously fought for Texas Rising's progressive values. So I am really excited to be able to have a conversation with you all and help Osmara moderate today. So to start off today, we wanted to let each elected give their own personal intro, about a minute to explain to folks watching who you are, things that you believe in. So we can start with Representative Wu.
All right. So my name is Gene Wu, and I'm a state rep for House District 137, which is in Southwest Houston. And I'm here because I support progressive values and progressive agenda. I believe that Texans should be able to make their own choices and have a pathway to the American dream. And, thank you.
All right, and whoever would like to continue with their own bio, you can feel free to jump in.
I vote for James Talarico.
Thanks, Dr. González. My name is James Talarico. I have the honor of serving as state representative for House District 52, which is Williamson County, just north of Austin, so the cities of Round Rock, Hutto, and Taylor. And I was born in Round Rock, and before I became a politician, I was a middle school teacher on the west side of San Antonio at Rhodes Middle School in San Antonio ISD. I led a local education nonprofit that did blended learning, educational technology in our classrooms. And now I serve, along with Dr. González, on the Public Education Committee in the Texas House. So obviously, the issues facing young people and in particular students in our K-12 system is important to me, not just politically, but personally.
And as I introduce myself, my name is Barbara Gervin-Hawkins, and I serve District 120 out of San Antonio, Texas. I've been a businesswoman, an educator, and truly an advocate for young people. I believe that young people will establish the change that we need to make in our country. So I'm excited to be here. Like my colleague, Jean Wu, I'm about progressive values. I'm about giving young people choice. And more importantly, giving them the on-ramp to make sure that the initiatives that they want to put forward can and will be realized. So I'm happy to be here to share this great conversation with all of you.
Hey, González, this little town outside barely on my only had 3 cups of coffee. Feel free to let because it's district, but 8 and how to work on progressive rights, LGBT, anti, all of the stuff in order to create I'm here for.
I didn't know El Paso was in the same time zone as Hawaii.
Same time zone as Hawaii. I'm lost. I haven't had coffee, Dean. If you're trying to be funny, I'm not going to get it.
Thank you all for your intros. I know I definitely feel Dr. González on that. I'm also in El Paso and also half asleep, but I'm really excited. Your all's energy is really high. I did want to give a quick reminder before we jump into questions that we have for you all. If you all aren't speaking, can you mute yourselves because we can hear like the feedback in the back. So just like a good housekeeping when like somebody's answering a question to keep yourself on mute. And the next portion of our like Q&A is going to be questions that we've you thought that are really important that people should hear from you all directly about. And then toward the end of the conversation, we're going to open it up to audience questions. So the first question that we have for you all is, In your time being a champion in the House, what are some of your most important and valued accomplishments? And whoever feels compelled to start, we can go in the same order as last time if that works best for you all.
So I apologize. My computer is away from my camera. I'm actually shooting off of a digital camera, which is why it kind of looks weird. But I've been in the House for 4 terms now. I'm running for re-election for my 5th term. I've done a lot of stuff, but mainly I focus on a lot of criminal justice, a lot of social justice, juvenile justice type of issues. I do a lot of work with people who have been arrested, people who have been incarcerated, because that's what I do for a living. I represent kids in CPS and kids who have been arrested. And so a lot of my legislation is focused on that. But because I work with kids who may be headed to an adult prison system, I also want to know, hey, how did they get here in the first place? So we also do a lot of stuff like CPS, like working with a pre-K education, because, you know, how a kid ends up in a place where they're locked up right now and they may head to an adult prison system. They got there for some reason, and we're trying to figure out what that reason is. And a lot of work we did is based on that. In 2017, I carried probably one of the largest CPS reform packages the state's passed in 20 or 30 years. That was really important to me. We worked for like 2 years on that bill package, and hopefully we restored a lot of balance to the system and gave a lot of rights back to families. And we really pushed our child protective system back towards trying their damnedest to reunify families over anything else, instead of just making our courts an adoption factory that are just happy to take kids away from families and break them up. We want to give families and kids every opportunity to be together. And, you know, one thing that I really worked into that bill that I'm really proud of and that we pushed really hard for was, one, making it not that you can't take kids away from families just because a parent got caught smoking pot. That's not a reason to tear a family apart. And number 2 is we put in a provision that says you cannot take a child away from a family because the family is poor. Poverty and being poor is not a sign of abuse. It is not a reason to separate families, and we should give them help instead of giving them pain. And so I have a lot more. I have 4 sessions worth of stuff to talk about, but like those are like my big accomplishments.
Yeah, and I can jump in. So, I mentioned in my intro that I was a teacher in San Antonio. The neighborhood that I taught in on the west side is a historic, beautiful Mexican-American neighborhood, and also one of the poorest zip codes in the state of Texas. So, my students faced enormous challenges just even before they walked into my classroom doors in the morning. And, when I look back on my time in the classroom, I felt like I didn't have the time or space or training or resources to have the really important conversations with my students that would allow them to live a fulfilling life. I was trapped in a system that was focused purely on academics, reading, writing, arithmetic. And there wasn't time to talk about social, emotional learning, a student's well-being, healthy relationships with themselves and with others, how to take part in the democratic process and take ownership of that process, how to advocate for themselves and their families. All the things that we all know on this call are more important than whether or not you memorize the quadratic equation. And our system, our public education system, particularly here in Texas, is not built for poor students. It's not built for students of color. And so, one thing I was proud to do as a freshman was introduce a package of bills that I called the whole student agenda. And I did this along with a bunch of my other colleagues. But the idea was to shift our system to treat students as human beings first and students second. Students are not just empty vessels into which we pour academic knowledge. They are alive people. And as anybody on this call who's been an educator or has been a parent knows, there's a lot more that goes into creating a human being than just academic subjects. And so that package focused on mental health in schools, focused on social emotional learning. It focused on restorative justice. It focused on environmental safety in schools. on practical curricula like sex ed and civics. And so I was really proud to introduce that package. I think it helped shift our conversation away from an obsession on standards and assessment, and really talk about what does it take to ensure that our students are fulfilling their God-given potential.
Thank you for that, James. And, for me, I'm the senior citizen on the panel, so I want to talk a little bit about, the things that I think are so important to our young people today, because my interest has always been about young people. Starting one of the first charter schools in the state of Texas, we went after dropout recovery because we knew that a lot of our young people had traditional public had not met their needs, that there needed to be a choice for them to participate in. So I'm a big proponent of giving our young people opportunities to succeed, to mature, and to grow up. Also, for me, law enforcement is critical. A lot of our young people have got caught up in the system at a young age, which has prevented them from getting student loans, housing, jobs, on and on. So that's one of my interests. And education, for sure. I worked on the bill. One of my most proudest bills is school safety, making sure that our teachers and our students are trained on how to take care of each other through my bleeding control kit bill. I thought that was most important. And also vocational training. We got away from the vocation. And everybody's not going to go to college and get a white-collar job. And I believe working with your hands is notable. You can take care of your family. And we've got to get back to pushing our young people towards those professions that pay a good wage and that allows them to take care of their family. And finally, I'd like to say this. To me, today is about all of you young people, how we can support you, how we can encourage you to be the tree shakers so that we can do the things that we need to do in law enforcement, in education, as well as in the community. I hope my legacy will be that we've put in place this upcoming session, which will be my third session, is that we're putting in place things that truly benefit our young people. I'm concerned about college debt, y'all. Today the question is, are we going to get married? It's almost, hey, I love you, but how much debt you in? If I get with you, you got 100,000, I got 200,000. Before we buy our first house or car, we're in major debt. And so I'm definitely concerned about that. So again, I'm happy to be here today to talk about those issues that we need to address and why young people need to be engaged specifically in this election cycle so we can make a difference. Thank you.
So good morning again. I thought two things. One is a practical and one is a theoretical. And so I think those are very real ways in which we do organizing, right? Like we want to always be value centric, but also have practical outcomes to like achieve what we're trying to achieve. So practically, I think many of you have heard me talk about the colonias. There's over 4,000 colonias in Texas, 263 in my district alone. So advocating for clean water, wastewater, and water and wastewater infrastructure has been key. Like the fact that we have thousands of families in Texas that don't have access to water is complete like BS, right? Like we are living in 2020 and we could get them water. It is a choice that they don't have water and a wrong reality of investments. Like we can spend $800 million a year. So literally over $800 million last bienniums, billions of dollars in border security, but we can't get people wastewater and water infrastructure. Like that is a choice. That is not a reality, right? So I'm very proud to have fought for that. But also theoretically, and I think even more important to me is the work that I'm doing to engage intersectional praxis, to say like all of these identities, race and gender, sexuality, ability, class, all of these identities exist, and they don't exist in silos, but they inform and perpetuate each other. And so how do we recognize that through public policy and through leadership? And so that's, to me, while really hard to look to like legislatively as a practical, it is the ways in which you do the work at a legislative level.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing that with us and for being amazing, strong leaders for your communities. Another question that I have for you. So right now, the voices of the Black Lives Matter movement is so strong, and a lot of young people are getting involved. What are some ways that as young activists we can communicate investing in community rather than investing in the police to people that have never had that conversation before?
I'd like to start it off because I'm a big proponent of our Black Lives That Matters initiative. As a matter of fact, they meet in my facility and plan. So we have created here in San Antonio a coalition of organizations to make sure that we have a conversation, we know what's going on, and we're working together. So, as we look towards moving in the future, what we can do to help is continue to collect allies. You don't have to be Black to be able to support Black initiatives, because I think our concerns impact the entire community. Not only just people of color, but even white people in poverty that are still struggling in the same manner. So when I think about change, I think about those things that we have to do. The word defund the police is scary for a lot of people, but I like the word reimagine what policing should look like. And for me, we have to look at the entire law enforcement apparatus, which includes legislation, which includes the courts. I mean, a lot of young people getting 30 and 40 years, y'all, and that shouldn't be. So we've got to look at the courts. We also got to look at sentencing. When someone fulfilled their obligation, they ought to be able to get their life back. So I believe at the period of time when people show they've been good citizens, we ought to be able to expunge those records. And so we want to work on that type of thing too. And also advice, legal advice, so our young people are not always plea bargaining and getting bad deals, not understanding these things impact their record. So I see us doing more in the community, educating people about life, not just educating people about the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s, but also about life, decision-making, health issues, legal issues, educational issues, and the whole gamut. So I'm here, to support our young people in doing some of those things they need to do. Thank you.
You mind? I think Mary and I are actually both appropriators, and we actually have fought for a lot of the same stuff in the state's budget. And really, a lot of the times when we talk about defunding the police, I think the conversation that gets left out is what we should really be talking about is funding the other stuff that matters. Just defunding the police doesn't do anything. It just defunds the police. But what we really need to talk about is that money needs to go and be spent on other things. So every session for the past 3 sessions, or 4 sessions actually, we've spent an extra $800 million on quote unquote border security, to make Republicans happy. And that money goes to buy speedboats and helicopters to do nothing. Literally, we have people state troopers sitting on the border watching for people violating laws they cannot legally enforce because of the U.S. Constitution. And we could have done so much more with that money. And that's the real conversation I think we should be talking about. What should we be spending that $800 million a biennium on? And a lot of times what we argue is like, look, we could have put that money and pay for pre-K. We could have paid for childcare for working families. We could have gotten health care for all these people. We could have paid for all our veterans to go to college for free, and so on and on and on. The legislature is about choices and it's about values, and that is where I think we should expend our energy on. It can't just be defund the police. It has to be, you need to fund the programs that actually protect our society, that actually make our society better. And I am 100% Representative Gervin-Hawkins. One of the big things that we've been fighting for, even before George Floyd died, was to talk about how do we deal with incarceration? How do we deal with the criminal justice system? Why do we have people who have drug addiction issues, spending their life serving a life sentence. When it costs the state $23,000 a year to put a man in prison, we could have taken that money, put him on rehab, and have money left over for other services. Why do we do that? Because those are the choices we make. And I think if you're a young person, what you need to do is advocate. You should go and talk to your state representative, go talk to your state senator, go talk to your congressman, congresswoman, U.S. senator, and say, if you want my vote, I need to know your answer for this question. Will you end mass incarceration? Will you end the war on drugs? Will you fund pre-K fully? Will you put money into education instead of buying more riot gear? All those are good questions, and hold them to it and say, I want an answer. Don't give me a bullshit answer. Don't give me the walk around. Don't give me, don't fluff me away. Give me a yes or no answer, or I will assume that your answer is the worst, and hold them to it. I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. You make them answer. You get a response from them, and then when they do it or don't do it, you let the world know. And I'm going to join Barbara again. One of the things we really need are not just advocates for legislation, but advocates in court. And I've been saying this for a long time. We need more Black and brown people to go to law school and become lawyers so you can defend people, so you can protect people, so you can fight against people who are abusing their power, corporations who are using their money and their power to crush people. Go to law school. Be a lawyer and save people.
It's as an educator, always rich to me that defund the police is considered off limits in our political debate when defunding health services, defunding public education has been the stated policy of our state government for decades now. Dr. González earlier talked about using kind of the organizer ethic. And I think that's so critical in this conversation because I consider, although I'm a politician and many of the folks on the call are activists, that we both have to adopt an organizer ethic, even though we kind of play two separate roles, right? Activists see the world kind of from the mountaintop, what's possible. I have to kind of see the world from the weeds about, what can we accomplish in the moment given constraints. But both have to be organizers, meaning that we have to do the work to bring people along with our vision. Unlike my wonderful colleagues on the call, I represent a swing district. My district voted for President Trump in 2016. It's a district that within its current boundaries hadn't voted for a Democrat since before I was in kindergarten. And so I have to do a lot of the work of bringing people along with a progressive vision. And so, oftentimes, and I'll say this as a white progressives tend to be in politics for our own personal and intellectual needs, right? Sometimes we are provocative just to be provocative, right? To fulfill something within ourselves. Most of the folks on the call who come from an endangered community know that this is a matter of life and death, and not getting something done means people will die. And so when you have that sense of urgency and when you're grounded in that reality, you are much more interested in how do I organize folks and bring new people along with a strong vision. So, for instance, a hashtag like defund the police is getting people all riled up in my community. But when I start talking about, should we have armed officers showing up when there's a fender bender on the highway for insurance purposes? Most people think, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. Should we have armed officers show up when there's a mental health situation? Most people kind of understand that that's not what we should be using police officers for. And, we always expect protesters to be nonviolent. What happens if we expect our government to be nonviolent? What does that question open up in terms of possibility? And I think, the voices in the street, particularly Black and brown voices, as they have throughout our history, are pushing us to expand our moral imagination. They're pushing us to live up to our stated ideals. And that's uncomfortable for folks who are in power or who are part of a group that has power. But that doesn't mean that uncomfortable conversation doesn't need to happen, and that those questions can be exciting, and they can push us to do something greater and something better. So I just want to thank everyone on this call who is an activist, who is doing that work of seeing the world from the mountaintop, and pushing us, those of us who have to work in the weeds, to really try to go bigger and better and try to build a different world.
Well, this is going to come like zero surprise to James Talarico, but I kind of disagree with you, James. So we have this running joke. I think it's funny. I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure if he thinks it's funny as I think it is. But I don't think there's a binary between elected officials. I don't think you meant this for the record. I'm just gonna. I don't think there's a binary between elected official thought processes or constraints, well, quote unquote, and activist constraints. In fact, I think they're more blended and should be more blended. I feel like as someone who's been an organizer my entire life, I still hold on to that role. And while a struggle and while maybe more nuanced, I'm grateful for that background and that activism and the fact that I was chaining myself to buildings less than a decade ago in order to create awareness about issues in which I cared about, and would chain myself up into a building right now if need be to make sure that we are protecting folks, right? So I don't think, and I don't want to encourage the idea that leadership should look and it can only be made in the practicalities, because I think we could look as closely as John Lewis, right, who was really great about being a thought leader and thinking about from the treetops and being practical. And I don't think those are binaries. And so I want to challenge that a little bit. I know you didn't mean it that way, but I'm just going to articulate it in my way. And so that goes back to like, I want to be really direct about the way I answer your question. What are ways that as young activists we can communicate investing in community rather than investing in the police to people that have never had this conversation before? So here's what I would invite you to do. Forget that they're elected officials. Think that you're talking to your neighbor who like doesn't think like you, because here's what I think happens. There's an assumption that is made that someone gets elected and they get it. And that is just not the truth, right? There are so many areas in which people who are elected have to continue their learning and their growth. But I think that the ways in which we communicated what's being elected, people just assume that doesn't have to happen. So I really love that in the chat box, there's a lot of talk about Paolo Freire, right? Who says you have to love is a dialogue is based in love, and things like that. So let's start from a place of, I'm not just going to communicate with elected officials like this is like what I need and want, which you should, but also have a long-term strategy of curriculum development for us, for them, for us and them, because I think the assumption that they get it, even though they have a responsibility to, but may not, has been a disservice to the causes that we're doing. Like, I'll give an example. Most elected officials in the legislature had no idea about colonias. Should they know? Do they have a responsibility? Et cetera, et cetera? Yes. But helping them over the last decade understand that has been a process, right? And answering really triggering questions like, well, why don't they just move? Why did they decide to live there? Like, and having to process those conversations, I think, would serve this movement, the defunding the police movement well. Like, how do we humanize our work to bring everyone into the conversation? So I'll let's leave with this. My favorite quote is a bell hooks quote, and I'm just going to paraphrase it because I can't remember for word. But it's basically, how do we hold people accountable but make space for their transformation? And particularly in a conversation like this, those two dynamics have to be blended, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for all of your answers. I know for me it's intimidating to speak right after Dr. González because everything you're saying is just so spot on. So we're going to ask one more question that we had, and then we're going to start addressing comments that have come through the chat. So the final question that we are going to ask is, what efforts can be made to assist undocumented people that are facing the effects of COVID, both financially and medically? For example, folks that are unable to work because they've lost their jobs, and medically because they might be unable to provide documentation to receive testing sites or medical assistance.
I'll go first if someone wants to. So I represent Southwest Houston, which is one of the largest immigrant communities in the state, if not the entire United States. I have a large refugee population that is documented, but still very afraid. And I also have a very large undocumented population, probably around 20 to 30% of my district's population is fully undocumented. And our people are the ones who work in the back of the restaurants, our people are the ones who clean your toilets, who mow your lawn, and do a lot of things that make life bearable from day to day. And they're also the ones getting sick right now. My district is now a hot spot because not only because our people are essential workers and they have no choice but to work, but because they also live sometimes 2 to 3 families to one apartment. And I think a lot of people are shocked about that, but that this is the fact of life. When housing is $1,000 a month, every single bedroom houses one family, and that's just the way things are. And then there's no choice about that. And some of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis is trying to prop up more testing sites. And this is a particular challenge because, unsurprisingly, undocumented people don't want to come out and get tested because, one, they're afraid that ICE is going to be there at the testing site, and two, they're afraid that if they test positive, that they're going to tell the government that they're positive, and not only will they be fired from their job, but the government will come after them. We're trying to use community navigators to work past this issue, to talk to people in the community who are trusted to help work through this issue. The city council is looking at right now passing another almost $20 million housing assistance program. And unlike the previous housing assistance programs that the city or county has passed, this one does not use federal funds of any kind. So therefore, there are no questions of where are your papers. So this one will actually be eligible for undocumented people, and it's not going to be a first come first served basis, which is excellent because it's going to be based on need. So if you have someone that's about to be evicted, but there's 3 different families living in that one apartment, we're going to focus our attention on that first and prevent 3 families from being moved out instead of 1. There's a lot more stuff, and we're everything from trying to provide food to making sure that sanitation, that employers are doing what they're supposed to be doing to protect their workers, providing them with masks, providing them with gloves, just staying on top of it. It's still a challenge. It's still a challenge because of the way that the state has done this half-assed open, reopen, reclose, reopen, and with no enforcement, no rules. You have a lot of employers who are just doing whatever the hell they want, and the city can't go after them. The state's not willing to go after them. And it's putting not only the lives of people, their customers, in danger, but more importantly, it's putting the workers who have to be there in danger. And I hope the state can change its mind. I hope Governor Abbott can finally get a hold of this and actually do what he needs to do and do enforcement and take corrective actions on this before it gets really, really out of hand.
And Sabrina, I'd like to address that because 60% of my district is Hispanic, and I call it living in the shadows, some of them, because of the fear of ICE and whoever else. So what I've done is reached out to my churches and was able to get PPE to my churches so they can distribute it to the community. So we create that buffer in between what I call the system and the people, because most folks trust the folks at the church. So that was one way. The other thing that we're doing in my district is providing food from a couple of the local middle schools. So instead of having to go to the food bank and sign up and register, we're basically have created drive-bys where we have certain days on Saturday, certain time. You just come, you drive up. We've got volunteers that come, and we're serving the community. But I think what's most important, and a lot of things that Representative Wu has talked about, we're doing. But I think what's most important to the people, the young people on this call, is this. As you see families in need and you're aware of the resources, connect that family to those resources. Be the individual, be the buffer in between the system and that family. Be that, what I call boots on the ground advocate, to make sure these families' needs are met. Because remember, a lot of this has to do with lack of trust of systems. So when you have people who have lack of trust, so they don't reach out, we need those buffers to help hold their hand and make sure they get connected to those services. So I would say a great community service project would be for our students and our young people to do outreach and find these families and these individuals and start connecting them to those services by being the buffer. That would be my recommendation for folks on this call.
As in, like so many other areas of our life together, this pandemic is exposing kind of the cruelty of so many of our systems that we thought were designed to only hurt some of us, that actually hurt all of us. The fact that our federal government, in the middle of a global pandemic, is still committed to ICE raids, that the Department of Homeland Security is still committed to kidnapping and imprisoning children here in our own state in a Hampton Inn, in the middle of this kind of national emergency, just shows the commitment that we have to the oppression of undocumented Americans. And but I think what's happening with a virus that does not respect political boundaries, that doesn't respect documentation, doesn't respect nationalities, what we're seeing is that, and what many of the folks on this call have always known, which is that the health of our undocumented communities is the health of documented communities, and that we're all inextricably linked. And so the efforts to dominate and to oppress certain groups have now been, I think, exposed for the impacts they have on the entire state. And I hope that is an awakening for all of us. We have activists on this call who have been doing this work for so long. I'm hoping for the rest of the state who hasn't been engaged in that work, that they are now, the cruelty, I think, has been exposed at a new level. And I think our challenge is, how do we harness that awareness, that raised consciousness, and be able to channel it into not only electoral changes, but ultimately policy changes next session.
So yeah, I'm going to start with, I agree with James Talarico this time, that the global pandemic has really exposed some of the current realities that exist in society that have always existed, but now it's like, oh, now we really, really can see, and why we should have been doing a lot of this work ahead of time, why we should have expanded Medicaid so people have access to doctors and have really systematic ways of being able to protect themselves and their families in moments of pandemic. It's not like, oh, now there's a pandemic, let's build an equitable system. We build the equitable system so in moments of pandemic, everybody can survive, quote unquote, right? Because ultimately people are dying. And so I know we want to get to the question, so I'm just going to keep that comment brief, but yes.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing that. And like Sabrina mentioned, that was the last question that we had from our end. So now I'm going to go ahead and ask one question from the chat. And then afterwards, Sabrina is going to wrap it up with just like last comments that you all may have. So the question that we're going to be asking comes from Paul Colbert. What do you see as the biggest dangers in the upcoming session? If you all want to share those. It was a 411, y'all.
All right, I'll be happy to jump in there. As a newbie, I'm going to rely on our vets like Representative González and our Representative Wu to guide us through this uncharted territory. This session is I've heard out of the Lieutenant Gov's mouth, they're going to call several special sessions. So it's my understanding we're going to have a long year next year. But I think what's important is that we've got to work on sensitizing our colleagues, okay? But even before that, young people, we got to vote. We got to change the House. We've got to change the House from Republican to Democrat so that we can have people with our same values that can make decisions. So that's number one. Number two, we're going to be very, very methodical on addressing those issues that are people-based. I think that's important. What the pandemic has unveiled is how our folks, the ones we care about most, have truly, truly been hurt by this pandemic. We already know that throughout history, the challenges that we face, but now it's upfront and personal. So again, we're going to pull on our allies. We're going to work through our legislators who have a lot of experience, and we're going to work on those issues that are people-based and focused. Gene, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay. I was going to say, James, did you want to go first, or?
I can jump in just as the other newbie before we let you and Representative González kind of help us with your experiences. Because, but having said that, I think if I'm right, none of us served in 2011 with the last cataclysmic budget shortfall. So even though we have more experienced members, really, so many of us are going to be trying to figure this out for the first time with something of this size. Because 2011, after the Great Recession, we cut more than $5 billion from public education and other critical services. So we've seen this movie before. And so I don't want to overwhelm everybody because there's a new emergency every day that's threatening ourselves, threatening our communities, our loved ones. But I also want to make sure we're keeping our eye on the emergency on the horizon. And for me, that is the budget shortfall that we may be facing unless there is overwhelming federal aid, which I don't know if we can count on. But the smartest folks that I talk to think that the 2011 cuts that I just mentioned are actually the floor, and that we're actually looking at something a lot greater than that. And so for me, we go back to our conversation about organizing. In my experience in politics, the folks who win the argument are the ones who talk first and say what their message the most consistently and the loudest. And so, I've been trying to talk to as many education advocates as I can about how do we start now by drawing a line in the sand and saying we're not going to accept cuts to health or education in the next session, no matter what the budget shortfall looks like. And that's sometimes you get the reaction in the Capitol and the 10 blocks around the Capitol. That's an unreasonable position to take. But the other side of the aisle has already taken revenue increases off the table. They've done a good job of making certain options taboo. So I think our coalition, not just Democrats, but progressives and anybody with a functioning heart, should be able to make cuts to health and education taboo. Take them off the table. I don't care where you get the revenue. I don't care what taxes you have to raise, but you're not going to make our students and our teachers, you're not going to make the sick and the elderly pay for this pandemic. We are not going to balance our budget off of the most vulnerable people in this state. And that kind of line in the sand needs to be drawn now, not in January, not in February, not when the first drafts of the budget come out. We need to be pressuring lawmakers today to commit to pledging that they will not sacrifice our students and our teachers and our nurses in the next budget cycle.
And I would say, actually, I think James is right, but I would list the budget as the second most vital thing, second most dangerous thing that we're going to come across. I think for me, looking at the long term, the most dangerous thing in 2021 is redistricting. Because if you look at how we got to this place, how we got in such a deep hole, how we got screwed in 2011, how the legislature was able to make a $5.4 billion cut to public education is because Democrats got raked over the coals because Republicans won at the exact right time during a census year, and then afterwards they redrew the maps to favor themselves, and basically just dominate the legislature, not just here but all around the nation, and take over entire states. They were able to change voting laws. They were able to institute massive voter suppression. So a lot of states that should not have elected a Republican U.S. senator did. And then now we have a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate for the better part of almost 8 years. And how many? And we couldn't get our Supreme Court justices nominated, but they rammed like 300 judges, federal judges, through in the last few years. And think about what that means for the future. And so for me, being able to take up control, being able to control, 2018, Democrats with badly gerrymandered districts wiped Republicans out. And if we have a chance to even get remotely fair maps, we will take over this state. Democrats and progressives will take over the state, and we will finally have a legislature that works for people. And that's not just going to be for one session, but it's going to be at least until the next census. So that's what I'm afraid of, because it's both an opportunity and a real danger.
And I see we only have 3 minutes and 40-something seconds left, so I'll be quick. Gina's right. Well, everyone's right. The budget, redistricting, all of that is critical in what's going to happen. But also, we don't even know who the next Speaker of the House is going to be. And I think having to navigate all of this crazy, right, is going to need strong leadership and an ability to work together towards to navigate all this. So I will say this. There's a huge possibility the Democrats will take the legislature, partially because of the work of all y'all are doing on the ground. And so here's one of my asks of y'all, since you have me up this morning. Let me tell you what I want you to do. No, I'm kidding. But I think that one of the things that the Republican Party has been good at, and we don't need to model it exactly because they do it in very dangerous ways, but I think we have to at least learn from some of the things that they have done, is that they have included grassroots organizers in the conversation of who should be the next speaker. Right? And I think that as Democrats take the power, take the House, it shouldn't just be up to the Democrats, but leaders who have helped us get the majority be part of the conversation. What kind of speaker are you looking for? Why? But that conversation can't start happening in November. That conversation has to start now. And so, knowing who the next speaker is going to be critical to navigating the budget stuff and navigating the redistricting stuff and navigating the next election after this one, right? Because then we have to keep a Democratic majority. So there's so many things that we have to do. But the first step that's going to happen is electing the first speaker. And hopefully it's a Democratic speaker. But the question is, and for y'all watching today, in what ways do you want to be part of that conversation?
Thank you so much for all of your responses. Those are all really critical things that we're thankful that you're bringing to our attention. That way on our end, we can help advocate for it and fight for it. So thank you all for taking the time to share that with us. So we do, on the timer, it does say we're at a minute mark, but we're not going to get cut off. We're going to go a little bit over because we do have one final question that I feel like a lot of people who are on this call, when me and Osmara were crafting these questions, we felt that it might be something really good to hear from y'all directly. We want to know, for your final thoughts in conclusion, in your current capacity, what advice would you give to your younger self when you were considering getting involved in politics? Because I know you all have mentioned go to law school, get involved, but for a lot of people who suffer from imposter syndrome and, just scared of making those first steps, what do you wish that you would have heard at that time?
I think what's important, number one, is being passionate about what you want to do. And I want to say this to young people. Politics is the game changer. It's the game changer. And you've got to be involved. And even if you don't run for office, you still need to be connected to your elected officials, because that's where the rubber meets the road. So when you have ideas and your friends and you're not satisfied where the community is going, you have got to be engaged and be willing to speak up so that you could be part of that decision making and processes. As we all know, historically, a lot of our African-American leaders were young folks. They were in their 20s. John Lewis was in his 20s. Martin Luther King was in his 20s. So the movement comes from young people saying, I'm tired and I ain't going to take it no more. And so just get that in your mind. Stay together, organize, continue to be organized, and don't take no for an answer when you want to get things done. Thank you.
So I have the honor of serving as the youngest member of the legislature currently. And so I ran when I was 28 years old, never run for office before. And, I'm often asked to give advice to high school students, college students about, what they should do if they want to run for office. And I always advocate for self-work. And oftentimes I tell them to pray or to meditate, or to reflect, whatever form that takes for you. Oftentimes when we talk about getting ready to run for office, we talk about, all right, you got to figure out your fundraising list, and you got to figure out your field plan, and get a staff together, and we always skip over the critical self-work that has to happen before you can get to any of the strategic steps. Because as we mentioned when we were talking about organizing, there are lots of different roles in this political ecosystem in our democracy. Whether it's an elected official, that's a particular type of role. Whether it's a nonprofit leader, whether it's a policy wonk, whether it's a writer, an artist, whether it's an activist. I mean, all these things play a critical role in moving us forward. And so you have to figure out, what am I trying to accomplish, and what way can I attribute the gifts that I've been given to make that possible? And you may arrive at a different answer than you thought you would if you take that time to reflect and to pray. And you know, we're gathering here on a Sunday, and I try not to do a lot of events on the Sabbath, because I think it's an important time for us to go inside. We spend so much of the week giving out to others. It's really important to take time to go deeper within our own selves. And you know, in my faith tradition, you know, Jesus started his ministry by gathering a group of the disenfranchised, the persecuted, the heartbroken. And what he told them as the Son of God was, you are the light of the world, right? He didn't say, I'm the light of the world. He didn't say God was the light of the world. He said, you are the light of the world. And whenever I get a chance to convene with young organizers, I always think that applies. In a time of such darkness, all of you are the light of the world. And, you know, the way that authoritarians and oppressors and tyrants win is by stamping out any hope that we still have left. And so the fact that all of you are spending your Sunday on a call with other organizers means that you haven't given that hope away. And that's how we win. And so I just want to thank you all for letting me be here and letting me be in the presence of your light.
All right, I think, Mary, you want to go, or do you want to go last?
Whatever makes you. I'll go, Gina. Way you can go last. I've been going last a lot. I will say, you know, what's one thing I would tell my younger self? Well, so many things. I always joke around that there are 3 things I wish I would have known before I got elected. One is how hard it is to date once you get elected. So difficult. Let me tell you, being on Bumble and being a state rep, not the greatest combination. Number 2, I'm just cracking myself up this morning, is the financial reality, right? Like, if state reps make $7,200 a year, right? What does that really mean for low-income, working-class folks running for office? Like, I think that we kind of just gloss over it, but it's a very real reality. Like, especially if you're a public servant, like if you're a teacher or you work for the agency, or if firefighter, whatever, like, you cannot do your job anymore. So now you have to quit your job, live in Austin part-time sometimes, and make a very little money. And how do you survive, right? And I think one of the things that we're talking about, structural change, how can we change that structurally so middle class, working class families and folks can be part of the process and not just outsiders, right? But inside the building, inside the rails, making policy change. So I would say that. The third thing I would say is, for me, personally, I was still working my PhD. It is impossible to do school. And, I did it, but it's so hard. Try to get all your schooling done before, because it's hard to be, just the emotional labor of academia and the legislature is very real. And so that's the advice I would give to y'all. Advice I'd give. And lastly, I would say, when I ran for office in 2012, nobody believed I could win. I was a feminist, queer activist who was young, in a anti-choice, socially conservative district. Like, everyone's like, that girl isn't going to win. Well, long story short, I won. So here's what I would say. Be fearless. Just do it. What do you have to lose? You get to have an experience. So everyone, just go run for office. I'm here for it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. And as someone who has really bad imposter syndrome, I would tell myself, looking back 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I would tell myself the imposter syndrome doesn't really go away once you get elected. is something that I think, especially somebody with Asian parents, who tell me like, why aren't you doing something that makes more money, like all the time? That it's hard, but what do you have to lose? If you want to go out there, if you're mad, you're pissed off, and you think the world is a shitty place and you want to make it better, what do you have to lose? Go out and do it. And I'll say this. You don't have to run for office. There's a lot of things you can do to make your community a better place, and you don't have to run for office. I know it takes a certain type of like personality, and it's a huge sacrifice to run for office. Trust me, there's four people on this call who have made that sacrifice, and it's not always fun. And I would say more often than not, it's not fun. It's a real pain. But you don't have to run for office. And there's so many other things you can do. And one of the things, I'm going to say this again, go to law school. And we could use so many more advocates. And it's not just good defense attorneys, but we need prosecutors who grew up around minority communities, who understand what it's like, who understand what it's like to be poor. We need judges who will be sensible, who will listen to people, who will treat people with kindness and compassion, no matter who they are. And beyond that, I would say, like, go out there and even if you don't want to run for office and you don't feel like you can do it, go advocate. You can go out there and talk to people, talk to elected officials, talk to people in the community, organize people. Some of the most powerful people I know in this world are organizers. And they don't have any real official power, but their power is in the power of the people. And that means a lot more to me than necessarily somebody that I'm a colleague with and has a vote on the floor, because they can actually get stuff done. And so, if you're like me and you are, you're very, very self-conscious about who you are, and you're afraid that you're not good enough, that you're not smart enough, your English isn't sharp enough, trust me, it is. Because I've met a lot of my colleagues, and if you've met my colleagues, you would not have second thoughts about some of our colleagues about how good you are. Because if they can be a state rep, you can be a state rep. Just trust me on that. Thank you all so much, and and I'll throw this out. If you are thinking about, if you're a young person, you're thinking about running for office, I think I'll offer this out there about any other state reps here. Come find me. Come find me on Twitter. Come find my email. If you can't find me, you got bigger problems. But find me, contact me, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. I'm happy to do a Zoom with you, and we'll talk it through. If you're around Houston, we'll sit down for a cup of coffee when that's possible. And we'll talk about running for office and whatever else you need to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing these answers. I want to tell everybody that is here as attendees that we do have 1 more minute with Ryan's break. If y'all want to go and show him some love. Afterwards, which is like a 1:10 happening now, we're going to have a radical self-care session with the wonderful Sade Jones. So hop on over there right now. Everybody on this panel, Representative Wu, Representative Talarico, Representative Gervin-Hawkins, and Representative González, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being amazing leaders and champions for Texas Rising and all the young people in Texas. Have a wonderful day, y'all. Thank y'all for joining us.